It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Fellow Quillers, here we are again. I'm so pleased to be with you, and I want to tell you all, I want to express my eternal gratitude for the support that the Quiller Nation gives this wonderful podcast and to Dragon Wagon Radio, and we're such a proud member of the Dragon Wagon Radio Network. If you are not already an official member of the Quiller Nation, be sure to visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com, and go to our Patreon page where you can sign up to be an official Quiller at the various different levels that are available. Remember, the serial Quiller level is the level where you get to gain access to our special bonus features, and we're going to continue to add to that library. Coming up very soon is going to be a live streaming opportunity where you will be able to tune in and listen to Jake and I have a discussion about what it's like to put the podcast together and how we do things behind the scenes. So watch for that to be coming, and that information will be posted on the Patreon page. And remember, you can visit the Patreon page even if you're not an official Quiller to learn things about the show, about episodes that are coming, to gain access to the research and links from some of our guests, and to just enjoy some of the various weird little posts that Jake and I will throw up there from time to time. So be sure to remember to visit don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com, and visit the Patreon page to stay informed about all things Quiller in nature. I want to welcome back once again my friend and your favorite guest of the podcast, Mr. Hank Whittemore. You know, Hank is so accomplished, and I learn more and more about him every time I'm with him. From his Broadway career to his television career to his journalism career to his novelist career. I mean, the man has done so many things. And one of the things that he has absolutely done is he has changed the view of so many people about what the authorship question is really about through his monumental work, The Monument, as well as the version of it that's a little more palatable and condensed for some of you out there. It's called The Living Record. And if you don't have a copy of The Living Record, you can find it on Amazon and anywhere you purchase books. It is available in a paperback version. It's a fabulous book, and it's a real great introduction to what The Monument is all about. And it also truthfully explains what the basis of the sonnets really are and why they play such an important part in this whole authorship mystery. So be sure you visit Hank's website. Hank, welcome back to the program. What's your website, Hank?
Well, you can go to Hank Whittemore's Shakespeare blog, and that's really it. And I haven't updated that. So if I just go to Google and put Hank Whittemore Shakespeare, I guess.
You Google Hank Whittemore, and you're going to find a lot of other things too, not just the Shakespeare stuff, right?
Yeah, I've got to get my own blog again, or website, or whatever it is. I haven't had time.
Well, today, Hank, what we're going to talk about is another work that you created and that is out there. It's called Shakespeare's Treason. We did an episode a couple of years ago now, I think it is, about the play. It's a one-man play that you wrote with your friend Ted Story.
Yep.
And that you've performed multiple times in multiple places over the years. And if listeners remember that episode, and if you don't, you can go back and find that episode in the Quiller archives on the website. But if you remember, one of the things we talked about in that episode that came about through our discussion was the idea of converting the piece into something that any actor could perform. The original piece was very personal to you. Right.
And that was the idea, since I could explain some of, it was a one-man show about the work that I'd done, but translated into a dramatic form, and and a solo show. And Ted's story is quite instrumental in being able to help and co-author the play as well as direct it to transform it into what we needed. And what was the question again?
Well, I was just pointing out that the original piece was very personal to you, and I remember.
Oh yeah,
I remember when you gave me a copy of it. I remember reading it, and I remember thinking at the time, this is definitely the voice of Hank Whittemore coming through.
Right.
And I thought to myself, wouldn't it be great if, not to wipe out the voice of Hank Whittemore, but if the voice could be changed so that any actor could deliver
anybody
it.
could do it, male,
Right.
female, whatever. And one of the major thing that was taken out was an anecdote near the beginning where I quote George Orwell saying, the history is written by the winners. And that's an interesting statement. If the Germans win, or his point was if the Germans had won the war, there'd be a different history written. And that happened in Shakespeare's time. When Robert Cecil brought in King James, he had been the engineer of the destruction of Essex and the muzzling of Oxford and Southampton. It's a very big story. And the history that we have includes now the Shakespeare myth, And my point was that in my, to personalize it, we had an anecdote about when I was 7, a truck ran over me and I was sent to the hospital and I was really in bad shape. I'd run right. It didn't run. The back wheels ran over me. I ran into it. And they thought I was having nightmares, and they thought it was because of the Batman and Superman comic books I was reading. And this little girl across the hall had heard about it because they took away my comic books. And then she brought in a stack of, the nurse said, "Here's from the little girl across the hall, a stack of Little Lulu comics." And when I opened them up on my own in the bed there, they were filled with the Batman and Superman. And so I kept reading them. And then
So she switched the covers.
switched the covers, and that's it.
That's a classic thing, right? You put the fake cover on the content of the book that you're trying to read, and nobody knows the difference, right?
It's an old story. And my parents would be there, anybody, the nurse, doctors, and they would see me reading Little Lulu. Meanwhile, I'm having a ball reading Superman and Batman. And the end of that story is the nightmares went away all by themselves. But the history was written by the winners, which were my parents and the doctors, and they told the story, the history, every Thanksgiving, of how they cured my nightmares by taking away my Superman and Batman comics. And I could have corrected them, at that time.
Sure.
But I kind of enjoyed hearing the story, so I never corrected it. But when I say to the audience in that anecdote, as Orwell said, this is history written by the winners, everybody laughed because they got it in a personal way.
Sure.
I was reluctant, and Ted was right to not have me take it out. But for another actor to do that, you can't duplicate a personal anecdote like that very easily.
And what my intent was when I first suggested to you that you convert the piece into something that any actor could perform, what my thought on that was, what we didn't want was a script that an actor had to be playing the role of Hank Whittemore, talking about the sonnets and the living record. What we wanted was this sort of, I don't want to say omniscient narrator, but this, sort of Socratic teacher who is guiding the audience through this story, this exceptional story that can be found within the sonnets. And I believed, and all the listeners of this program know that I profess this constantly, that I believe that the key to sharing this story with more people is through entertainment, is through having plays, and if we can get a movie series or I always say that I think a television series would be the greatest thing ever. I don't care. HBO,
Sure.
Hulu, Amazon, whoever wants to do a series on the life of Oxford. It's such an incredible life. And this portion of his life, this portion of the story is such an incredible story that's told through these sonnets. And so we're here, when this airs, it'll be long since past that you and I have been sitting together and working on the script, but to share with the listeners, we've been spending some time together working on the script and converting it into a more universally available piece of theater for actors to perform.
Yes.
And that's going to be coming very soon. But I wanted to share with the audience what that process has been like and why we have done what we've done with it.
Yes, you took it in hand and made a lot of small but very important corrections that add up, clarifications and things like that. And we worked on it together, and I'm good with it. And this is we also in talking about the whole thing is how did Shakespeare could have written a lecture, and I've given talks. And we do papers and we do all this, but Oxford chose to put plays on to instruct and show history and tell stories, the real stories, through allegory. So here is a stage piece that kind of tells this sonnet story in a different way than the 900-page monument or the 450-page living record. It is a 90-minute show that starts with concepts like truth and history and getting into it slowly, but not too slowly, just, picking up things and suddenly weaving the context for what we're really talking about, which is here's this book of sonnets that disappeared, which were, in fact, an act of treason because it's writing about a successor to the throne. And it tells the story that way until right to the end of the story where Oxford disappears and he saves Southampton's life, the life of his son by the Queen. And the whole thing falls apart for him, but he does preserve the sonnets for posterity. I call it like a message in a bottle to those of us. And he says as much, eyes not yet created shall o'erread, and tongues to be your being shall rehearse, when all the breathers of this world are dead. So that's the purpose of the sonnets, is not his contemporary world, but those of us in the future. Now, I don't know how he predicted that he was going to be so wiped out that people wouldn't recover his history until Thomas Looney in 1920, for goodness sake, uncovered him as Shakespeare, and then new Oxfordians began to dig for a full century of his history that really was buried. You get two lines about Oxford. Had this great life, regardless of being Shakespeare. A great life, an incredible thing. You could, that's many stories on its own, and it was never written about really for a modern audience. So I Once Gone to All the World Must Die was a prediction by him. He knew it was coming. And that was part of the deal, I believe, that he made with Robert Cecil, who had all power over Elizabeth at that point, from 1601, the rebellion, the Essex Rebellion, and the Southampton being in the Tower, condemned to death. Oxford, I think, just decided it's over. We talked about this in another podcast about the Phoenix and Turtle, saying the dynastic hopes are dead. Now, I'm getting far afield, perhaps, but it's to the point that the Shakespeare name doesn't come until 1593. Earl of Oxford is 43 years old. He's had a full life writing all these comedies and histories, and probably even by then, the first drafts, at least, first or second drafts of the great personal tragedies of Othello and especially Hamlet and all. Hamlet will keep on working on. So here he puts this great name on for the revisions of his work, and he dedicates the first two narrative poems to the Earl of Southampton, calling him, referring to the world's hopeful expectation for him. I believe that what's happened here is he's advertising and promoting his son as in succession, because a crisis is at hand. Elizabeth refuses to name a successor, even though she has an unacknowledged son by Oxford. And unless there's some way to solve this, the country's going to fall into the wrong hands.
Well, one of the things that was important to me about the piece as I was going through the revisions and making my notes, part of it was the old newspaper editor in me was coming out and, a comma here, and this should be a colon, not a semicolon, and that kind of stuff, and that's just the kind of stuff that everybody has to go through with every piece that they write. Even, obviously I need editors too in everything I write. We all do. We all need second sets of eyes, third sets of eyes, sometimes even a fifth set of eyes can find a typo that the rest of us missed. But also what was important to me was that there are these historical contexts that are in the piece that I think speak to an audience in a way that connects them to their own life and their own experiences. And I think one of the universal aspects of this experience is this parental love that comes through. And that's one of the things that I love about the piece. And I think that your book, The Monument, and then subsequently The Living Record, I know many people who say that changed their entire perspective of the authorship question. It changed their entire understanding of the sonnets. And I think Shakespeare's Treason, this, 90-minute, roughly around 90-minute performance, not only changes perspective, but opens the door to an audience. And one of the things I wanted to make sure about the text was that while the actor is delivering this information, it's not assumed that the audience knows anything about anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think one of the things that happens, unfortunately, with a lot of Oxfordian scholars, and I'll use air quotes for the word scholars, because many of us are not technically traditional scholars. It doesn't mean that we're not scholarly, but many of the Oxfordians out there, when they come up with something or they pursue a theory or they dig into an idea or documents and they start to deliver what they found, they make these assumptions that their audience knows what they know. And I think that's a very dangerous ground to tread upon. And one of the things about this podcast that I think that a lot of listeners have shared with me over time that I think is one of the positive things about the podcast is I try really hard to make sure that we're not talking over the top of the audience, that we're not assuming that they've been studying this for decades, that they know all the players, that they know all the people involved, and try to guide them into their journey. And again, their journey. And you might be out there listening, you might be going, yeah, I've looked into this Prince theory and I've looked into this succession thing, and I'm not sure I buy it. I'm not sure that that's for me. And that's quite all right. That's fine. I don't ever tell people what they should think. I tell them what I think. And then I tell them why I think what I think and where I find the answers that speak to me. And I ask them to go and do their own research and go and do their own study and find what speaks to them. But the theatrical piece as it stands, I think truly speaks to the parents in the audience about what it's like to be a parent and what it means to be a parent and the amount of love and what you are willing to do or sacrifice for your child. And I think that's the story, and it's the beauty of the story of the sonnet.
So father trying to guide his son who constantly is, who may love him indeed, but he constantly is doing the wrong thing. He's doing the opposite. He was urged to marry Burleigh's granddaughter, because at that point, if Southampton marries the granddaughter and then Elizabeth is willing, and she would be at that point, to name him in succession, then once he became king, Cecil's granddaughter would be his queen, and Cecil's would have royalty. This would solve the succession problem. And believe me, it's written about all of her, but you weren't supposed to write about it or speak about it in Elizabeth's time. Succession was the crisis at hand. There was only 8 years to go from 1593 to the rebellion, and then 2 years to go until Elizabeth died. And so it was 10 years altogether. That's a 10-year story, and that's when Shakespeare, quote unquote, was in the works, on paper, at the same time as the Earl of Oxford was alive. He died in 1604. So this is the answer to why there's a Shakespeare mystery. It's because of the deal that was made with Cecil to save Southampton's life. He would forego any claim to the throne. The whole story unfolds. But the show starts with, how do you tell this tale? Oxford was telling the tale by means of universal love poems. How do you do that? Well, number one, the reason he did it was because they would live forever. He needed to have them endure. So he wrote the greatest and most intensely wrought poetry, lines of verse, that probably one of them ever written. And he did it by creating a language that was developed over many years for these three people. Himself, he had a few ways of referring to himself. And Southampton, he had ways of referring to him which were mostly dark and light, the Queen's view of him. Her favorite made him bright, made him gold, made him all that. Her dark view made him black and in disgrace. All those words that would characterize the darkness, and that's why she's the dark lady. There's no dark lady as such, those two words, that nickname in the sonnets, nor is there the fair youth. But see, he's fair in her eyes, golden, all that. And Oxford's true.
And it's true. Most people who know something about the sonnets know those three names. They know the fair youth, the dark lady, and the rival poet. But nowhere in those 154 sonnets, not in any single verse, do you find any of those names. There's no reference to a fair youth. That's a nickname that scholars have given this persona that they see evolve through this poetry. There's nothing in the sonnets that says, this is the dark lady. There is a lady who is described with words of darkness, but there's no such thing as dark lady anywhere in the verse.
No, not at all. And in Sonnet 25, about the end of the failure of the Irish campaign, Essex and Southampton are the great favorites. And when they return, he says, the great princes favor, their fair leaves spread, but at a frown, the monarch's frown, they and their glory die. So her frown, her viewpoint in her eyes is either favorable or unfavorable. It's either light or it's dark. That's why she's the dark lady. Once he commits treason, he's in the dark. And the dark lady sonnets bear that out. She's in mourning for what had happened. And therefore, my mistress's eyes are raven black. Raven is the symbol of the tower bird. And her eyes are black only because, therefore, all this has happened. And therefore, the tragedy has happened. So,
as we discussed, you mentioned a previous episode where we talked about the phoenix and the turtle. And, Oxford loves bird imagery. There's also a previous episode, if you look back through the Don't Quill the Messenger archives, there's a great episode that I did with Earl Showerman about Macbeth and all of the aviation and aviary
Sure.
references and the bird references in that play particularly. But he, this is a guy who really loved birds. He talks about birds a lot in a lot of plays, or a lot of bird references.
Yeah.
And here he uses these same references in the sonnets. Another thing in the script that I think is really important that is pointed out is the fact that this is the first time that Shakespeare, the sonnets is the only place that I can tell in the entire canon where there is a personal voice involved, where the word I is used as the voice of the writer.
Right.
He refers to himself regularly throughout the canon. Even in Venus and Adonis, he's Adonis. In The Rape of Lucrece, I'm not sure that he's personified in The Rape of Lucrece, but he's definitely personified in many of the plays. And there are many out there who believe that he is so many different, he's Oberon, he's Festi, he's Jaques. But here in the sonnets, he is himself. He is I, and he refers to himself and his own feelings and his own losses and his own suffering, tremendously personal in the sonnets. And I think that's a really important distinction to point out.
Absolutely. And I think, for the authorship question, people who are interested, curious, and involved in it, it's important to know and helpful that without the right author, it's totally impossible to figure out the sonnets or why he's writing anything. You don't write these things without these great things without a real purpose and a real goal. And Oxford had goals and purposes at all stages of his life, whether it was to write satires for the court, or whether it was write histories that would reflect upon the current need for patriotism when Spain was going to attack, or whether it was his personal stuff. But here he's using I, and ironically, the only other place where we have published Shakespeare using I is the two dedications to Southampton.
Right, correct. You're right.
It's not part of the works, and you're absolutely right.
It's not part of the poetry, but it is.
Yeah.
But those are definitely specific and very personal. The first one, Venus and Adonis, a little more veiled, but in Lucrece, it's very specific. All I am, all I do. Yeah. Every bit of what I strive to do, I do for you. And isn't that how a parent feels about their child?
Sure.
Don't you do everything you do for your kids? And don't you feel everything your kids feel? If your kid falls down and bumps their head, you feel the pain. If your kid's up late at night with a cough or a sick stomach flu, who feels the pain? The parents feel the pain. That parental love is something. I have a dear friend. Her name is Angie Keys. We went to high school together. And when my daughter Stella was born, I was talking to Angie, and she'd already had children. And we were talking, and she said one of the most profound things to me. And I don't know where she got this, and I don't know if she coined this herself, but I'm giving her credit for it anyway, because I've used it ever since. But as soon as your child is born, it's like watching your heart walk around outside of your body.
That's a good analogy, and
you're constantly terrified that something's going to happen to your heart walking around outside of your body.
Yeah. And you can feel that in the sonnets. The love I dedicate to your lordship is without end. And what I have done is yours. What I have to do is yours. Being part in all I have, devoted yours. Now, goodness sake, it's amazing. But I wanted to say, too, that part of the show is to not just throw all this out like we're doing right now, which to me is a little, there's so much to say that it's almost hard to get it out. But in the show, you pick up one piece after another and throw it up, and in a way that becomes more and more exciting. I think more and more the picture begins to form. And speaking of picture, the analogy is a double image picture. You see it a flock of birds, but it's also a school of fish in the water. How do you see that? Somebody has to point out your perception changes, and you see, the wings of the birds are really the bodies of the fish.
Those are popular memes on social media now where, people put up these double images and they say, what do you see here?
Yeah,
and,
sure.
sometimes you see a beautiful woman. Sometimes you see an old lady.
That's right.
Sometimes you see the bird. Sometimes you see the fish. Sometimes it's two people kissing. Sometimes but if you look at it another way, it's two people having an argument. Those are really popular images that people throw around on social media a lot. And again, it's this sort of, and who's the king of the double meaning? Shakespeare.
And for example, for the Queen, it uses beauty about 212 times, whatever it is, and fortune and heaven and nature and a few other words for the Queen. And for example, he's in disgrace, and there's a line, a crow, that's a black image, that flies in heavens, that's the Queen's, sweetest air, A-I-R, but he means heir to the throne. So your crow is flying in the Queen's sweetest, most royal, like good night, sweet prince, and in heaven's sweetest air, most royal air. The disgrace is now blackened him. And that's why the Dark Lady sonnets start out in Sonnet 127, in the old age, meaning right before this happened, black, he's now black, was not counted fair, royal. If it were, it bore not beauty's name, Elizabeth's name of Tudor. But now is black, in other words, still now, even now, are the black son who's in disgrace, but now is black beauty's successive heir. I don't know what could be more plain. He even uses the phrase successive heir in the history plays.
Mm-hmm.
It's beauty's successive heir, and beauty slandered by a bastard shame. Now that's a double language that is almost transparent. As soon as you explain a few of these words, and say it in the right way, one to the other, the meaning, it's like changing the flight of birds to the school of fish. Somebody comes along, the picture doesn't change, but your perception changes. They say, look, the wings of the birds are the bodies of the fish. And then, boom, the whole picture changes. That's the sonnets. And once you set that up, you begin to tell the story in Act 2 with who the three characters are. And the fourth character is a revelation, I believe, that the so-called rival poet, another nickname, another name that does not appear in the sonnets, is actually the pen name Shakespeare. That's the only rival, because while Southampton is a convicted traitor in the Tower, no one dare write publicly in praise of him, except for William Shakespeare, whose works are being republished.
Right. And it's, except for a man who cannot be called to account for what he's writing.
Right.
Because he doesn't truly exist. He's just a name on
just
a page.
name. And Oxford in that sequence, which is always called the rival poet sequence, and it's really misleading because nobody knew who the real author was or what any of these things were about. But the rival poet sequence is Oxford's the death of Oxford as in any way known as the great writer, and the ascendance of Shakespeare, the name. And he says things like, was it his spirit by spirits taught to write above a mortal pitch that struck me dead? Well, what could be plainer? Oxford means it. Figuratively, I'm dead. And this name, Shakespeare, has killed me. And he says to Southampton at the very last lines of that sequence, when your countenance, your image, yourself filled up his line, his verse, then lacked I matter, any substance, that enfeebled mine. That couldn't be more clear. In fact, it's a parallel to what Touchstone says to William, the country fellow, in As You Like It.
You are not Ipsy. I am Ipsy.
Right. And he says, look, it's like I fill this cup of water, but I pour it into the other. By one cup, I pour it into the other. Now it's empty. And that's when your countenance filled up his glass, if you will, then mine's empty.
There are so many tragic ironies in this story that I think play out so nicely through the script. And one of the things that, well, before I get into that, one of the things I really love about the script is Oxford isn't even mentioned until we're 15, 20 minutes into the performance, at least, maybe even further.
I think it's not until Act 2, maybe.
Yeah, it's about guiding people through the textual context that is necessary prior to the identity reveal.
Yes.
But part of the identity reveal involves some of those tragic ironies that play out through this story. And, one of the great tragic ironies of the story is Oxford invents this name Shakespeare at the first in 1593 to deliver these two epic poems to try to send a message to the Earl of Southampton, his son, saying, go get married. Marry this girl, Elizabeth Vere, who is my daughter, but is not my natural daughter. So there's no incest there. You are not truly brother and sister in any way whatsoever. And give it a shot, give it a try. This deal will help you ascend to king. And the interesting part of that is later on, if that deal had gone through, it would not have been necessary for the final deal to have happened. And if Oxford had not invented the name Shakespeare to push that deal, he would not have been forced into the second deal, which is that he would forever be Shakespeare and no one would ever know his work as his.
Yeah, as Bill Boyle, my friend and good collaborator over the years, remarked one time, the mask is now glued to his face. And that's
his own doing.
Huh?
And, it was his own creation.
That's right.
Killed by his own creation.
Another form of hoist by your own petard, I guess.
Correct, yes, absolutely.
And, performing, it was also a real challenge for me. Ted directed it and tried to tell me how to behave on stage, and I only probably succeeded. I don't know. We actors can be very critical. We get off stage and go, God, did I suck that time? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I've been there. I have had those post curtain call moments for sure.
One bit of advice he told me, and I know you know all of these things. You perform a lot more than I have. And he said, if something crashes through the ceiling and comes down, don't ignore it.
Amen. That's absolutely true. I tell actors all the time, pick up the penny, and they don't understand what I mean by that. But, let's say a prop falls off a table onto the stage, or something gets left behind, or a set piece falls down, or something's missing. You have to acknowledge it and move on. Producer Jake will say the same thing about podcasts. He's like, if the telephone rings in the background, mention it. Don't ignore it. If the dog is barking, the neighbor's dog is barking, and it's picking up on your microphone, mention the dog barking, because otherwise the audience is going, hey, is that a dog barking? What's going on right now?
Oh, is that a fire truck? Are they coming here?
And I tell actors, pick up the penny. And only actors of a certain age understand that, because it's actually a reference to a film. It's a Christopher Reeves movie called Somewhere in Time.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful.
It's a great movie. Beautiful. It's Christopher Reeves and...
I forgot the gal.
Oh, she played... my wife is shouting right now at the radio. She played Dr. Quinn, medicine woman. I can't think of her name right now. It'll come to me. Anyway, it's a fabulous film. And the premise of the film is he's trying to travel back in time to meet her as his age. He meets her as an old woman, and he's immediately captivated by her.
Yes.
And he wants to go back in time and meet her at the time where he wished he could have. And he comes up with this plan, and he figures out a way to do it. And what he discovers is that one of the most important ways to do it is he has to eliminate all things from the present in order to fully transport himself to the past. And, spoiler alert here, ladies and gentlemen, so you might want to hit pause or advance if you haven't seen the movie or are going to watch it. But at one point in the movie, he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out a penny. And the penny This is an old film.
From
This film was made in the 70s.
Yeah.
The date on the penny, I believe, says 1976.
Yeah.
And he immediately is thrust back to his own time.
Interesting.
And he can't get back. And what I use as an analogy for actors in an audience. Pick up the penny. Otherwise, you're going to transport the audience back to their own time, to their own moment, to their own place. And all the work that you've done to transport them into your world, the world of the play, will be lost if you allow them to keep staring at that penny.
Well, I'll tell you this, as far as that goes, I first performed it. I got, tried to get my feet wet on this, and I performed it for audiences of about 40, 50 people, sometimes more than that, in churches, houses all over Nyack. People opened their doors. They loved it. They didn't care so much about that. They were curious about the subject matter, but they liked the show. They wanted to be entertained. And they put up folding chairs, and they all were waiting. So the first one was in the guy's living room. There were, I think, only 35 people, but it was packed because it wasn't a very big living room, and I was at the front, and it was my first time doing it. And somewhere in the second act, toward the end of the second act, it reaches a real intense climax where they end up giving up their swords and go to the Tower, Essex and Southampton. And now we're setting up for the third act, which I go into in about 30 seconds. But I'm in the intense thing, and it's going. The rebellion failed. They sink to their knees, give up their sword. Phone rings. A cell phone rings in the audience. And I remembered what Ted said, if the ceiling cracks in and something falls through. So I turned to the lady whose cell phone it was. I could see her face. She was mortified. And I said, "Oh, go ahead. Pick it up. Answer. It's okay. We'll wait." And she did what to do, and she turned it off, and everybody laughed, and I went back into it. And it worked. And it also, as an actor, gave me much more a reality feel to the place where I was performing. And it helped a great deal as an actor doing this. So I had to translate all this scholarly work for the monument, all of this writing the script, rehearsing, and rehearsed with Ted a lot. Down in New York at the Players Club, we did a lot of that, and learning these things to get by, and to deal with the audience. So in normal acting, which I was used to, you relate to another character if you're speaking, and you're relating to them. You're looking at their eyes, you're looking at their reaction, and you're trying to do something. Here, I'm talking. My other character is the audience. And as yours going to be, and you're looking. So in Theater Row down in New York City, eventually after a year or two, I did this show, and on I come, and the lights are so bright from the top, and they're right in my eyes. I cannot see one single face in the audience. And it was throwing me for the first 5 or 10 minutes. I had to adjust. So all of the stuff that happens and technically and everything on the road, wherever we went, and we went all over the country, and we went to England and so up to Canada and so on. You never know. You could write a book about humorous anecdotes about what happens on the road.
Well, and some people, you're talking about, from a theatrical perspective, there's a famous story of a production of Shakespeare in the Park happening at Joe Papp Theater in New York, and a similar situation where a phone went off and the actor stopped and addressed it. And they got lambasted by the critics who said they broke character and they destroyed the illusion and they should have just kept going. And, you could be on one side or the other of that debate, but in a piece like this, where it is a monodrama, where there is just one actor and the actor is delivering the information to the audience, I think it works a lot better, because I think there's certain moments in the script where the actor literally talks directly to the audience.
Sure.
Very, very Shakespearean style, very Iago, Richard III type of style, but not a villain. But almost every monodrama is that way. And I've read plenty, and I've seen several And, most monodramas, the difference with this piece from most monodramas are one actor portraying one character, telling you that character's life. I remember seeing, of all people, I saw Leslie Nielsen perform Darrow on stage in Palm Springs one year at the McCallum Theater in Palm Springs. And it's a great piece of theater too. Clarence Darrow standing there telling you about his life and all of the momentous moments and incidents that occurred throughout his career as one of the greatest attorneys of American history. Great piece. I've seen Barrymore. That's that's a piece I'd like to do someday, actually, is the Barrymore piece. That's a fabulous piece, but there it is. John Barrymore telling you about his life as an actor. And there are so many others. There's a great one that is Capone. There's some wonderful ones for women too. Amelia Earhart and others.
Yeah, but usually they're the character talking.
Right. It is the character
talking. Historical character.
This piece is not Oxford telling you his life. I think that there could be room for a piece like that somewhere.
That would be nice, but far be it from me to try to portray the Earl of Oxford speaking to somebody. I could do Hank, but I was going to say, it is hard to break that fourth wall when you're in a play with two other characters. And I remember I was 17 in summer stock in a barn theater, and it was a full audience, and a husband and wife are having a shouting match. And I don't know what happens. He smashed the table with his fist, the husband, and the whole back wall started to fall down on top of them. So the husband and the wife, one put up one hand, the left hand, the other put up the right hand, and they both held up the back wall of the living room while they continued the argument. And we were dying backstage. There were a number of incidents like that where you don't break. We had one scene where a fly, we all toasting with champagne glasses. They were full of something, ginger ale, and this fly was buzzing around everybody, and we're all looking and we knew this woman was going to get up and make a toast, and we saw the fly go right into her glass, and then we all waited to watch when she drank it and then spit it out, like a crazy, and we all nearly fell over, hoping the curtain will fall. But, you couldn't break the whole deal. I mean, we all kind of left because it was part of the scene at that point, right? But not the wall. They weren't going to say what.
I've actually lived through that. When I was in high school, we did a production of You Can't Take It With You. I played Paul Sycamore, and right at the final curtain call, after the G-men come in, the FBI is there and the whole thing. And now it's time for the final joke. And then the curtain call, the curtain caught the edge of the flat and it couldn't close. And it started to take the wall of the set down. And I was the tallest person on stage, because those who know me and have seen me in person know, I'm 6'4". So I was tall in high school already. So I was the tallest person on stage. So it was going to hit me on the head first. So I had no choice but to stick an arm up and keep the wall from coming down on us. And, one of the aspects of that play is that Paul Sycamore and his assistant make fireworks in the basement. And so I remember saying something to the effect, I can't remember the name of the character that is his assistant. It's like Mr. Diamato or something, some Italian name, I think. And I remember making some quip about, did you leave the Bunsen burner going or something, right? Like there'd been some sort of fireworks explosion that was taking the house down. No. But we were able to get the curtain off of the wall and get the curtain to close so we could all leave the stage. But yeah, those kinds of things happen.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I always tell actors too, props hate people. Props will do everything they can to steal the show from you. You'll have prop problems, especially guns for some reason. Love to not go off when they need to on stage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so many things happen. And also, we're talking about translating a book, information, nonfiction, all the rest about the sonnets into entertainment that also is dramatic, right? And I did this for the DVS group and larger audience, I think, inside the Globe, the Shakespeare's Globe in England. And this was in, I forget what year, but it was the year before Shapiro came out with Contested Will against the Oxford authorship movement. And he slipped in and attended that performance. And I was going to talk to him after the show, but he escaped. He was left. So a year later, Contested Will comes out. And I looked in the index to see if he said anything about...
Wait, not to interrupt you, but so just to be clear, so Shapiro slips in the back to watch this Oxfordian presentation.
Yes.
And then right as it's over, sneaks out because he doesn't want to be confronted by Oxfordians or deal with that at all, right? So slippery devil. He sneaks in, pays attention to what the opposition is doing, and then sneaks out and runs away as fast as he can.
Right. So, I thought nothing more of it after that. I mean, I noted it. I thought that's interesting, but he was curious. He was doing research there, trying to figure out all the ways in which we were wrong or something. And he was using the libraries in England. And so a year later, whatever, Contested Will comes out. And it came out that fast because my performance, he wrote up an account of seeing the performance in his epilogue. So if you ever have a copy of Contested Will and look in the epilogue, there's about a page and a half about him watching that show. And his main point was, he said this was it worked for the audience, and no matter who they were getting it, and they were entertained, and they were fascinated, they were riveted to the thing. And he said that the show was spellbinding. So and of course it's full of it's all wrong, but it's spellbinding, right? So a year later after that, or in the months after that, Shapiro was speaking at the 92nd Street Y in New York City. It's a great place for authors to talk about their work. And I showed up, and he had me ask a question or two, and we talked in public. And then afterward, he was signing books, and we chatted privately. And I said, well, Professor, the professor in Columbia, you said my show was spellbinding. And I'm pretty sure you had your tongue in your cheek. You were making fun. He said, "Oh, no. It was absolutely spellbinding." And I said, "But you didn't agree with any of it." "No, maybe not. But the point is, I couldn't take my eyes off it, and it was riveting for him." And so he did say that, and it was not tongue in cheek, and it made me think at that point. That shows it could be effective, whether you want to believe in the authorship of Oxford or not.
Well, and that's a great story, Hank, because what it tells me is that Shapiro, who's like one of the chief anti-Oxfordians, you know, he's like the king of Stratfordian.
Yeah.
It tells me that he was afraid. He feared the piece.
Yes, he did.
Because of how effective it was. And of course, him and his elitist, I have all these letters after my name attitude was probably along the lines, and I don't want to put words in the man's mouth, but probably along the lines of, this scares me because the common people will be convinced by this.
And I want to say, too, that he notes in that epilogue that he knew that the Oxfordians were divided over whether Southampton could be the son of the Queen, of the Virgin Queen, or Southampton's young lover. Oxford's young lover.
Correct.
Okay. He noted this division in a kind of more general way, and he said the Oxfordians should know that they have nothing to fear from this issue because everybody was riveted to the show. So this was a great thing for me to hear that he wrote. But here's what he did afterward. He began to turn out these books about the relationship of Shakespeare writing histories according to current events, like King Lear, and so forth. Macbeth, probably. And these are traditionally works that were written after Oxford had died, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that makes his point. And then he writes about them, but it was as though he borrowed the idea of a political context, a current political context for these works, which was not the usual thing for Stratfordians to do. Usually it was just sort of isolated as this great work that meant nothing, you know. So he got scared on that level too. And he countered it with a very effective series of books, I guess, that made more money for him. Absolutely crazy, but that's...
I love that because it validates something that I've been saying for years now, which is that entertainment is the key to winning the war of popular opinion. And nobody knew that better than our man.
Yeah.
You know, when he wrote Henry V,
yeah,
he didn't know what Henry V said to those soldiers that helped them to go win that battle against the French, but he wrote a speech that is immortalized and will go down in history forever and be used over and over and over again to inspire people.
Yeah.
He can't, Edward de
we
Vere.
we happy few. I'm sure Henry V never said that.
No. And, Oxford, when he wrote it, couldn't give citations and references and prove what he believed Henry V had to say. And P.S., the audience didn't care. It didn't matter. And that's not to say that the scholars out there who are doing the work that they're doing is meaningless or is not important, and that their citations and their references and all of that work that they're doing, and these giant books that have 800 pages of footnotes behind them aren't important. But I don't think that they're effective in this war of public opinion about who the true author is. And I do think that a piece like Shakespeare's Treason is extremely effective, and it appears that Shapiro agreed that it's an extremely effective way to convince the people of the truth.
Yes.
Now, in his mind, it would be to dupe the people into this false myth, which we, of course, take the opposite position and say, well, you've been duping the people in about your false myth for ages, and we're the ones actually trying to get to the bottom of this. And I think that that's a testament to the importance of the work that we've done on Shakespeare's Treason.
Yes,
and especially what we've most recently done with it, which is to turn it into more of I kind of liken it to Derek Jacobi's performance as the chorus, talking about Henry V, in Branagh's film version of Henry V.
Yes.
Right? He's sort of this, again, I don't like to use the word omniscient, but he's sort of this like all-knowing sort of, kind of guiding character, storyteller,
a larger
character
view in a way.
It's like, for those who are familiar with it, it's very much like the stage manager in Thornton Wilder's Our Town.
Sort of like that. That's right. And sort of brings you into the story. Here's Emily. Here's so-and-so. And here's our little town.
And here's how it happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of a thing.
That's right.
And not unlike Jacobi's intro to the film Anonymous as well, right? Where he's there on the stage and he makes these comments. For a muse of fire, he uses again, it's a great, I think that's a great analogy to who this character is that we've created out of this piece that is no longer Hank Whittemore's story of how he discovered the sonnets, but more, here's the story of the sonnets for those of you in the audience.
And it's going to be Stephen Sable performing it. That's right. And I'm very happy about that. I know you're going to do a great job. And we have
I don't know if I can memorize all those lines anymore.
That was kind of intimidating at first. But, the story it tells was only made possible after 10 years of studying the sonnets and having almost an accidental discovery that the main 100 sonnets in the middle all begin after 1601 as a result of 1601, the failure of the Essex Rebellion, instead of in the 90s. The shift of a 10-year period, one to another, from a 10-year period to a 2-year period, really, 1601 until the Queen's death in 1603, it was the time shift. I already was in full agreement with the what we called Prince Tudor theory. Now we call it the dynastic succession theory because it's really more accurate. It's not about that was almost a facetious name, the PT theory, but it's about Oxford's real obsession almost with getting it straight and helping the country get a right successor. It's the theme of his great histories. Who should rule? What kind of qualities we need in a king. He didn't want James at all. So this whole aspect of the sonnets, the political nature beneath the love poetry and these words, the double image thing, would not be seen without that time shift. Then we could tell the story. And who needs to say about the discovery of the time shift? To me, it lasted 5 seconds. The ground moved, and boom. Then it took 5 years to write the monument. And it wasn't difficult. It all fit once I moved the correct biographical and historical context from the 1590s. Yes, up to Sonnet 26, it's the 1590s, up to 1600. But then the great bulk of the sonnets, including all the Dark Lady, is after 1601 as a result of the rebellion. Now that shift then takes away the other interpretations of the sonnets, and that's a terrible thing to say in a way. I mean, all the other cooks in the kitchen and all the it's like, stop. The context is different. You can't have this be this. There's no running around. Southampton's in the tower. You can't have him having a love relationship with either a dark lady or a fair youth in some kind of secret way. No, he's up in the tower. He's a condemned traitor. And for a lot of that time, he's condemned to be executed.
Well, one of the other important things to point out there is there are plenty of people who have looked at the sonnets and pulled particular sonnets out of the collection of 154 and said, look at this beautiful romantic love poem.
Yeah.
But it's noteworthy that none of the romantic, quote unquote, romantic language occurs until, like you say, after Sonnet 26.
Yeah.
He doesn't need that veil to hide what he's saying in the first 26, especially not in the first 17, right? The first 17 are all about go get married and have a baby.
Right. And I might add, in Venus and Adonis, which is then published a year or two after the 17 sonnets in 1593, 36 lines of that narrative poem dedicated to Southampton is Venus talking to the young Adonis with 36 lines mimic the 17 sonnets. It's get married, have a pass on your blood to another.
Right.
That's basically it. It's your duty. So he was making every attempt, and I might say the great John Rollitt of England, God bless him, he discovered there were 3 or 4 big occasions, including one on Southampton's graduation from Oxford in, was it Oxford? Yeah, it was Oxford University.
Oxford or Cambridge?
Well, you graduated from Cambridge, but then there was the Oxford graduation in 1592, and he's called the dynastic prince in Latin and Latin oration, and Elizabeth attended. So in other words, the PR campaign of Shakespeare on these 2 narrative poems dedicated to Southampton, they were starting to have an effect. And they knew about it before they were just published. These are Oxford's friends and associates who are other writers. They're picking it up and saying it. So it all came to a screeching halt when Southampton put the kibosh on the marriage deal with marrying Burleigh's granddaughter, Lord Burleigh William Cecil. And so, then another thing had to happen. And Oxford had to, he nonetheless, that's why he says, I'm with you, devoted yours. That's the reason for the dedication, that intense dedication of Lucrece in 1594. It says, okay, you've done all this, but nonetheless, I'm your father, and I support you no matter what you do. All I have, devoted yours.
And the text of the play carries that through. It's a flow line through, as we mentioned before, of this, parental love. And of course, one could ask, well, how come the queen doesn't share this same type of love for her son then? And one of the things that I point out is, well, she had no model to follow.
No.
I mean, when you look at her life, she didn't know parental love. She has no clue. Her mother was slain by her father when she was 3 years old. And her father was an evil tyrant who cared nothing for her and did nothing for her. She had no real context of what it was like to be a parent and had no love for any parent. Now, some could argue, well, she lived in Seymour's house and there was maybe some sort of a fatherly connection there, but there have been many others who have theorized that there was an intimate connection there between her and Seymour. That's not father. That's not a father.
No. And you can imagine being a queen in that society with all these males around her. She had to be tough as nails. And she told a foreign ambassador, princes cannot love their children who are to succeed them. They cannot love them. Their own children, because they're little royal brats running around going to grow up and take her throne. It's that simple. So
she doesn't have that same, what does, I love that one of the best references to that comes from Macbeth, where Lady Macduff says about her husband who has fled because he knows that he's a target. She says, he wants the natural touch.
Yeah.
Meaning he does not have that natural inclination of being a parent and loving his children. And I think that we could say that most clearly about Elizabeth. She was in want of the natural touch. And of course, the term want meaning lacking, not needing or truly wanting, but lacking. And she definitely lacked that. Ironically, I think it's interesting that we see in Oxford this different sort of connection where he has the natural touch. And it made me wonder about his relationship with his father, which we don't really know a lot about, John de Vere, but we do know from Hamlet that he was very much affected by the loss of his father. And I think that would bespeak something of his nature for wanting to love his son, Henry.
Yes. And, in the sonnets, in that dark period that happens after starting with Sonnet 27, he's immediately in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, and he's suffering the same shame as Southampton. Southampton is trying to, though thou repent, he says, I still have the loss too, and so he blames himself for not helping his son and for misleading him, perhaps for the Richard II performance, which showed how the intention was good to show Elizabeth how she could give up her crown and give it to another while obeying the royal prerogative, if you will. But instead, that was brought up as a reason for the riot, for the insurrection, and that was. And Southampton's condemned. So Oxford is in shame that he gave birth as the father of a traitor, a son who should be king.
You mean he's a parent who blames himself for the frailties of his son?
Yeah.
No, go figure, because, here again, you have these reflections of real parenthood. Oh, it's my fault. And maybe it was. Maybe he shouldn't have told him who he was so soon in his life. Maybe he empowered the boy to believe that he could be a king someday, and that caused some of the decisions that he made. He certainly was a chip off the old block when it came to his hot-headedness and his rash decisions, just like Oxford. And then, this whole Shakespeare creation turned out to bite them hard at the end. But also he's very clear in the sonnets, and this is also part of the text of the play, that no matter what he has done, And no matter who he is, and no matter what shame, and no matter what label of traitor, and being imprisoned, the love doesn't stop. And how many people out there, have children who have done some bad things? You don't stop loving them. There are parents out there who have children in prison. They still love their children. It's inherent. You can't stop loving your child. There are probably people listening right now who've had children who've gotten into drugs or gotten into gangs or had run in with a bad crowd. It didn't mean they stopped loving them.
Oh, no.
We talk about tough love even, where parents have had to make decisions to cut kids off so that they could get themselves help or help them into rehab or whatever the case might be. And these are the parallels, the universal human truths that this writer has always connected to so well, and why we love his works so much to this day.
That's right. Absolutely. And it accounts for so much of the anguish that you feel in those first 20 sonnets, starting with 27, where Oxford is, putting himself in the same position almost as his son. I'm at fault too. I did all this. And Oxford, even to the point, and this is extraordinary. I believe there are a few sonnets there where he's actually comparing himself in some metaphorical way with Christ suffering on the cross. Lay on me this cross. I still must bear the loss. Yeah, that sort of thing. And I thought, wow, that's, and in most situations, you think this guy's really grandiose, right? Well, that's the way he feels in this situation. That's how, he's thinking about it in this most, to him, kingship is such an important thing. He started life as an idealistic young man, totally idealistic about the rightness of royal blood and the rightness of royal, the crown. And he's willing even to support James once James gets in, and so publicly he'll support him. He didn't want him in, but he's not one to go against the norm. Maybe Southampton was. But
how could he want him in? We look at the entire series of history plays is all about strengthening and legitimizing the Tudor dynasty.
Yeah, and the kingship of
and maintaining that dynasty. The entire series, from John all the way through to Henry VIII,
sure.
That entire series of plays is all about that nationalism, about supporting the Queen and the Tudor dynasty and the Tudor rose and the strength of that. And so, of course, there's no way he could have possibly wanted James to be king. But like you say, he had to make a deal. And who wouldn't make a deal to save the life of their child?
So I might say that the show incorporates lines of the sonnets that fit exactly with the story in not some kind of random way, but actually in once the rebellion happens in the story and they're in the tower, and they're going to have a trial, all the references to the sonnets, all the quotes that come right out of the narrator, which will be yourself, are in order.
It's very chronological story, and I think it makes it easy for the audience to follow as well, is because it does. It comes in this very natural chronology, and then it ties things up. The denouement, as it were, is cleanly tied up at the end, and it's a great piece, and I look forward to working on it. Now that we've got the actors edition completed and ready, I look forward to working on it now as an actor. Yeah. And calling upon my beautiful wife to assist me with preparing it for performance. And so stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, coming to a theater near you, Shakespeare's Treason, starring yours truly, Stephen Sable, reciting the work of Mr. Hank Whittemore. Hank, as always, it's been such a pleasure to have you, and what a wonderful conversation. We touched briefly today on what you said when you mentioned Shapiro and how he acknowledged that Oxfordians have been split on this issue of, is the relationship between Oxford and Southampton father and son, or is the relationship between Oxford and Southampton one of older man and younger lover? And I think that's a whole nother future episode that we could talk about as to how those two camps evolved and why there is such a division there,
Sure.
and how we can maybe solve some of that in the future. So we'll have to look forward to doing another episode about that in the future. Thank you again for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to remind you to visit don'tquillthepodcast.com, where you can find the link to our Patreon page. Don't forget that at the Patreon page, you can find posts from our team about future episodes and bonus features, links to our guests and their research, and of course, information about our various Patreon sponsor levels and the benefits that come with being an official member of the Quiller Nation. Also, don't forget you can find Hank's latest book, The Living Record, wherever books are sold. And there's a link up at our Patreon page to the book, as well as Hank's website, so you can learn more about Hank and his monumental work. Another thing I'd like to mention that I have been remiss about lately, and producer Jake has been on me about this, is to ask you all to please visit the platform where you find your podcasts and give us a rate and a review. Many of the podcast streaming platforms out there will let you leave a comment or two about how much you enjoy the podcast. And of course, we love to receive those 5 stars when we can get them. Your rating and review will help others find the podcast and help us to continue to grow this Quiller community that is expanding all over the world. And speaking of all over the world, I recently received an email from Gunther Conrad in Germany. Gunther said he was enthralled with the recent episode featuring Luis Sousa and his research on The Tempest and Macbeth. Gunther said he reads Shakespeare in German, but has begun reading the plays in English in order to obtain a greater understanding of the works. I am so humbled by people such as Luis and Gunther, who are fluent in multiple languages, especially the classical languages. In fact, I believe Luis' mastery of classical Greek, Latin, Italian, French, and several other languages that he speaks places him at a distinct advantage over the rest of us in his ability to truly understand the language of the texts. Oxford's ability to create new words out of old words, combine words using the origins of Greek and Latin and other sources, and to present clues to the reader that can only be truly understood by someone such as Oxford, who was fluent in multiple languages. And I think we're at a disadvantage, those of us who only speak English or English is our first language, because Oxford spoke so many languages and his neologism was so expansive and based on the other languages that he spoke that sometimes I think we miss out on clues and we miss out on words and their meanings and names and things that have been pointed out by others who do speak multiple languages, or such as Luis, who is so fluent in so many. I believe if we can continue to reach out to our fellow Quillers in other nations, we can find even more answers to our many questions about the authorship mystery. And so those of you who are listening in other parts of the world, please reach out to me. Please send me an email, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Even if your English isn't very strong, I'd love to start a conversation with you, even if it's just by email, about the potential for having you on as a guest. I'm truly interested in speaking to those of us who have been digging into this question in other parts of the world rather than just in the English-speaking world, because I think there are clues and things that we may be missing that you can shed light upon. So please reach out to me, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Before I close this episode, I'd like to send another congratulations to our September Quiller of the Month, Joan Bray. And since we are now so close to October, let's go to the random computerized selector to see who our new winner is. And the October winner is Annie Fields. Congratulations, Annie. Producer Jake will be sending you your gift code to use to select your complimentary Quiller swag item from the Quiller Swag Shop. Do you have a Quiller swag story to share? I'd love to hear it. When I sport my Quiller swag, I almost always get questions from people who want to know what it's all about. So send me your Quiller swag stories to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. Or maybe you have an authorship question, share story to tell me. Remember that I go online all the time to buy used copies of authorship books from my favorite authors. And then when someone around me expresses some interest in the topic, I gift them a book. For me, it's usually actors I work with in my Shakespeare company, but not always. Give it a try. You can find copies of some authorship books in really good condition, sometimes for less than $10. I recently purchased 4 copies of Shakespeare by Another Name to replenish my supply of that book. And gifting that book often leads someone to go out and purchase other books to seek the answers to their own authorship questions. That is, of course, what we are all about here. So as we close this episode, say it with me, Quiller Nation, loud enough so that someone else can hear you. Keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.